is left is now used for the survival of the farmers themselves before they can even make or earn any living out of it. So in other words, it is one where the standard of living is at its lowest ebb when compared side by side with those of the first world or the more advanced world. So production is based on age-old technology. Still, the making use of hoes and cutlasses for agriculture is what the practice is up to this day, when the advanced world have gone way beyond the levels of agriculture that we practice in third world countries, which Nigeria is not an exception. So within the industrial sector, traditional household crafts preponderate. Modern industry, if it exists at all, is limited to a few lines. For instance, jute and cotton textile in India prior to the Second World War. Infrastructural services like transport and communications are extremely poor and limited. As in implicit in the structure of an underdeveloped economy, its relative factor endowment pattern is dominated by land or by land and labor together. Relative availability of capital is extremely low. Capital goods are mainly those which are turned out by the traditional craft. In countries like India and China, marked by high population pressure, the relative factor proportion between land and labor is itself adverse. With a low land-labor ratio, additional labor due to population growth stays back in the agriculture sector, since little opportunity of others remains underemployed. Labor, the human capital, is thus poor in quality. There is another major feature of these underdeveloped societies, and it's the fact that labor power is sold. And when you subject yourself to the sale of your labor power, you automatically also accept exploitation at that level, owing to the fact that there is no measure of standard that can be used to guarantee that labor is not exploited when it is sold. As such, the laborer is at the mercy of the owners of capital, and that to a large extent is exploitative, it is subjective, and it is an aspect that does not conform with the real values of humanity. So underdeveloped environment or societies have all these features and all these trappings that tends to show the extent of the difficulties of life and the inability of individuals to meet their material well-being within these societies. And to a large extent, they do not conform with standards of living in the advanced countries. Agriculture, for instance, in as much as it is still very rudimentary, there is the fixation at the production of cash crops. And those cash crops tend to now reduce the availability of food crops. Therefore, there's malnutrition in these societies. And to a large extent, they do not augur well with the survivability of those that are found within the trappings of these underdeveloped societies. In furtherance of that, asset ownership, particularly of the most important factor of production, land, is very unequally distributed in an underdeveloped economy. It may so happen that a handful of feudal lords own most of the land and the rest of the rural population work as tenants. Before I go further on this, in the interest of those that do not understand the stages of mode of production, there are pre-capitalist stages and also stages beyond capitalism, as we have been taught within the scholarly perspective of the Marxian theory. First of all is the stage of slavery or communalism, primitive communalism, where the economic heights are communally owned and everybody farms or produces to be submitted to the central purse. And in turn, those activities, agricultural activities, are done communally and the benefits are shared communally as well. So that metamorphose, due to its inherent contradictions and challenges of communal existence, it metamorphosed into feudalism. And a certain class of persons emerged under the feudal structure. If you look at this analogy, primitive communalism tends to exhibit certain traits of equality of all humans within the communal settings. Agriculture is done communally, household chores are done communally. But when it advanced due to the inherent contradictions of certain persons not contributing equally to the common purse, there was the need for a metamorphosis into a stage considered higher than primitive communalism, and feudalism ensued. Under the feudal system, certain class of persons became landowners, and class of those that could not measure up to the categories of the landowners became those that offer services to the landowners for the betterment of their existence. So in other texts, you will see issues of landowners and serfs within this system. So people farm and certain percentages are taken by the landowners, and then the remaining part is given to the farmers, and then they in turn maybe sell to other people. So feudalism became the practice of that time. But feudalism had its own challenges too, particularly when certain aspects of societies within the globe transmogrified to the stage of people owning private properties. And the contradictions that are inherent within the feudal system gave birth to a higher consideration. And that is why you find in some texts issues of thesis, antithesis, and a synthesis. The coexistence of opposing forces would normally give rise to new orders, and hence capitalism came about. And under capitalism, the commanding heights of the economy is not communally owned or owned by a few persons as considered under feudalism and as it relates to land ownership. But capitalism became a system where the forces of demand and supply dictated the events in the economy. There was private ownership of properties, and the extent to which people make progress is determinant on the extent of the input that they make within the system. So it is argued that capitalism also would have its own internal contradictions, ranging from issues of advancement in technology that will now reduce the relevance of labor force. And when labor force, the laborer cannot sell his labor force to make ends meet any longer owing to the increase in technology and then the advancement in technology and technology taking the place of man in the chain of production, there's the tendency that they will give rise to another social order. And that is where the argument of socialism and communalism comes in. So the argument here made is that under the feudal system, the land was the major source of production, and everybody to survive